Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the second session of today for the LawInSport 6th Annual Conference. For those of you that are just tuning in for the first time, or you haven't been on any of the other sessions that we've run, my name's Sean Cottrell. I'm the CEO and founder of LawInSport. I talk awkwardly for the first few minutes as everyone logs in and all the details come, but as I do that, I'll run through some ground rules. Of course, we want you to say hello to everyone and get to know each other. So if you want to put your name and your organization you represent and the country you're from, it also helps the speakers understand who's in the audience. Please do that in the chat function. However, if you do have any questions, please can you put the questions in the Q&A feature. So that's the particular Q&A feature. It means you can ask the questions, and then Khayran, who's moderating the session, or myself, who can come back in, we can ask the questions in due course. Other than that, thank you so much for tuning in. As I said, my name is Sean Cottrell. I'm the CEO and founder of LawInSport. Now, I'm honoured to have the panel with us today. Thank you so much for our expert speakers for joining us. Khayran, you're going to be moderating the session. Can you just introduce yourself to the audience? And I'll fade away and you can carry on.
All right. Thank you, Sean, so much. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on day 4 of the LawInSport 6th Annual Conference. My name is Khayran Noor, founder and CEO of Sports Legal from Kenya, LawInSport Mentorship Scheme, a member of the LawInSport Diversity and Inclusion Working Group. Our topic of discussion today is protection against exploitation with a focus on women in sports. It is with utmost pleasure to have with us 3 esteemed panelists who will share their experience, outlook, and general involvement in this topic of discussion today. We have with us today Khalida Popal, Kat Craig, and Madalina Diaconu. Sorry if I mispronounce your name, Madalina. Kindly introduce yourselves in that sequence, and then we can kick off our discussion. Khalida, please.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be part of this program. My name is Khalida Popal, and I am founder and director of Girl Power organization, which is based in Denmark, and I'm speaking from Denmark right now.
Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name's Kat Craig. Thank you to LawInSport for giving attention to this really critical topic. I'm a human rights lawyer based in the UK, and I run a not-for-profit sport and human rights consultancy called Athlead. In the last number of years, we've worked extensively with survivors and victims of exploitation and abuse in sport.
Hello, everyone. Good morning or good evening, wherever you are. My name is Madalina Diaconu. I am from Romania, currently living in Switzerland for the past many years. I am a professor of sports law at the University of Neuchatel here in Switzerland, and this is where I am right now. And I'm also an attorney at law representing victims or survivors of abuse and harassment in sports. My main focus areas are integrity of sports and safeguarding of athletes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Khalida. Thank you, Kat, and thank you, Madalina. So the big question is why we're here today and why this topic. The world is in the midst of one of the progressive eras in recent memories. And for years, female athletes have had profound impact on the world of sports, and we see more women participating and taking interest in sports than before. However, pressing social issues have been brought to the forefront at an almost unprecedented rate. Women are fighting for equal rights. Their fight for equality still continues the range of issues such as sexual harassment and abuse, financial abuse, emotional abuse, hazing, neglect, physical abuse, and child exploitation. Not to say that this is unique to female athletes alone, and not forgetting the para-athletes, which we understand also go through various abuses in the respective organizations. But the subject of protecting women in sports has been not widely discussed, and the need for this has been heightened due to the sex abuse scandals that have come to light, such as and not limited to Larry Nassar, former US gymnastic team doctor, Jean Bart, president of Haitian Football Federation, who was recently re-elected to serve for a 6th term, and Keramuddin Karim, former president of the Afghan Football Federation, the AFF. We're privileged today to have Ms. Khalida Popal, who through her bravery and fight for equality and for the rights of women and girls in football, had a major role to play in this particular case. Khalida, please, if you may, whatever is comfortable, please share with us your first-hand experience and involvement in this, and what challenges you face in trying to bring justice to your peers in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Khayran. In 2018, unfortunately, our women's national team of Afghanistan faced a major challenge, and the case actually during our training camp came up to us, where some of our national team players, some of young players of Afghanistan women's national team, were sexually abused and harassed by few team management of Afghanistan Football Federation, and the leader of that sexual harassment and abuse was the president of Afghanistan Football Federation himself, who was sexually abusing our players. And also we had some cases of rape within the Afghanistan Football Federation, that there was a culture of abuse in Afghanistan Football Federation. So when it comes to our knowledge, and I was as a sport director or program director for Afghanistan women's national team on that time, and together my colleagues who are Kaylee Lindsay and some other colleagues who are also in the management of Afghanistan women's national team, we tried our best to raise awareness and find a legal way and find somewhere to talk and raise awareness and information about what our players were experiencing. Unfortunately, in the very beginning, it was very difficult to find a way or a channel to report, because Afghanistan Football Federation is working under the Football Confederation of Asia, and we didn't find a system where you can write a report. And then we were also looking at FIFA. It was so complicated and so complex to find the right person that we could trust. We could tell the story. We could also raise awareness what's going on inside Afghanistan Football Federation. It took us really a really long time, and also it was very difficult for us. So we had to wait. For example, for me, I had to wait until I got an opportunity to go to a conference where I could meet the head of women's football committee of FIFA in that conference, and I had to request her to just give me 30 minutes so where I can actually share what is going on. It took such a long time, and it was very difficult to find a channel to raise awareness and also raise the voices of those voiceless women that they were sexually abused on the football pitch and by the name of football. And that was a time we had to sit and talk. The challenges that we faced, of course, the channel of communication, lack of trust. So many people, when I started the investigation about the sexual abuse and harassment in Afghanistan Football Federation, the people I interviewed, they were saying that every time that there was a representative of FIFA or AFC in the country, we were telling them. We sent emails, but we never received an answer on our emails. So many people, and we also saw the emails as an evidence that if those emails were sent and the awareness was raised, but nobody actually replied to those emails, and FIFA knew it 1 year ahead of time before us knowing it, that there was a culture of abuse inside Afghanistan Football Federation, but the action was not taken. So we had to find the right person to tell, and it took 1 year and 1.5 years, and that actually gave the abuser 1.5 years to abuse more women. And then when we raised awareness and then started, the case started, it took another 6 months to 8 months, and nobody was like really taking it serious, and we didn't know, like there was no communication, and it was waiting time was really a lot, and we were like wasting a lot of time and letting those abusers to abuse, sexually abuse, mentally abuse our players. And then we had no choice than going and asking media, which we actually, in a way, we actually put our lives in risk Because if nobody listened to you and you want to stop an abuser and a criminal, you had to find a way. And that's what we did. And we went to the media. We told the story. And when media took that serious, Afghanistan government took us serious, FIFA took us serious, and all of a sudden everybody took our case serious. And it shouldn't have been like that. In that way, we have risked, we have actually gained more risks towards our lives and also more pressure and stress, because none of us were educated about safeguarding, about sexual abuse, and about reporting. I was working in Afghanistan Football Federation. I never had a chance to get a course or even participating in many courses through Football Federation. When I was the leader of Women's Football Federation for 2 years or 3 years, I never had the opportunity, or there was no courses, nothing, information in those courses from those organizations that they were providing education or awareness. If, for example, our players come to us, raise awareness about an issue, how we should handle it. So it was very difficult, and it took really a lot of energy, a lot of time from us, and also it's in a way impacted a lot of negative, in a negative way also our mental health, not the whistleblowers, but also the survivors that they trusted us, came to us. We had very little knowledge how to handle the case, but we were at the end, we were very happy, and we are very lucky that right people like Kat, like so many amazing organizations, they were not part of Federation or FIFA, they came forward and they offered the support, and through their support we could manage to lead the case. And in FIFA they decided, and the president, or the former president, is banned for life from football activities in Afghanistan. Our case is going on, and in criminal court of Afghanistan, but so many people were affected by this case.
On that last point, I just need to ask, as the driving force behind this, and you put yourself at risk, what are the permanent or long-term challenges, or let's say long-term effects that you've had as a result of this? And in as much as, yes, the case was heard and was taken to court, and the perpetrator was banned and everything, what other safety measures were taken after for the survivors and the victims of the sexual abuse?
Talking personally, it has impacted a lot in my mental health. I am mentally, I don't feel like I'm healthy. I'm still kind of traumatized by what I have heard, and took all those stress and also all those stories in my chest, and trying to find a solution. That it was not going on an investigation, it was not my job, it was not my task. The minute that I was telling the story and raising awareness of what was happening on Afghanistan women's national team, on our players, that my job should have been stopped from that time. But I went to investigation, I did all the research, found all the documents. That was mine, it wasn't my job, and that affected me a lot, and it made also a stress, and I am in a way traumatized of hearing those stories. And and also in terms of safeguarding and protection for our players who came forward, told their stories. Of course, FIFA and other organizations came forward, supported, especially the non-FIFA organizations came forward, took responsibility, provided support, because in Afghanistan, Afghanistan culture, like any other culture, the victim blaming culture is still strong. Our players could not tell their stories to their family, to their parents, to their sisters. So even they were raped or sexually abused, they had to hide it, because if you tell in Afghanistan to your parents, to your brothers, what happened to you, like they will kill you before the main person, because the honor killing, it's because of the honor, it's the name of the image of the family. So because of that stress, they had to keep all those stress, and they could not tell to anybody. And when they told the stories, they needed protection, not only from the society, but also from the former president, who is a very powerful guy, who is a guy that has so much power in Afghanistan, and still government could not manage to arrest him. His power is above government right now. And we had to provide protection for them. And that's why so many organizations came forward, so many individuals came forward and provided support. And we could manage to get our players protection and support. And right now, a system is made. Of course, we had the very difficult one. We had the toughest one because people were not, they didn't have this experience, especially the organizations like FIFA. But now they are more experienced based on what they have seen with the Afghanistan Football Federation case. Now our players are safe in terms of like physically and they are safe. They need still mental health support in terms of mental health, and also everybody who was involved in this case. It was toughest case, and it is still, it's going on, and still it's going on.
Thank you for that, Khalida, and it's quite an eye-opener and emotional, I can tell, on your side as an indirect, indirectly traumatized with this. I'd like to invite the next speaker, Kat. As a human rights lawyer, having represented survivors and victims of harassment and abuse, please provide your insight on the subject based on your hands-on experience and exposure to these cases, and especially to the survivors, putting in mind that this is not limited to players and athletes, but also women in sports participants such as referees, coaches, and team doctors. What can you tell us on this now as an insider, having actively represented and gone to court and tried to get justice for these victims and survivors of this?
Thanks, Khayran, and thanks, Khalida. We've worked together for many years now, and every time I hear Khalida speak, it's still inspirational, and I know it's tough, but truly, Khalida, you are a hero, and so much has changed because of the work that you and the players and Kelly and others have done on this front. So always a pleasure and an inspiration. Before I speak a little bit about my experience, I just wanted to give a very brief but clear trigger warning. This is a difficult topic. The statistics show that likely with an audience the size of this, a number of us will have had a direct experience of abuse or experience of abuse of loved ones, and certainly, as Khalida said, secondary trauma as well. So I don't intend to discuss in any detail any of the facts of any of the cases. I don't think it's necessary, but I will allude to physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, and also the impact that that's had on the lives of survivors and victims. So do please look after yourself as well in the course of all of these conversations. My experience is as a human rights lawyer, having worked for now almost 20 years with victims and survivors of gross human rights violations in a range of different contexts, only in the last 4 or 5 years in the context of sport. But I have now worked across 5 continents with mostly women, but not only, mostly recent and ongoing cases, but also non-recent cases, and mostly in football, but also in boxing, gymnastics, and swimming. So I was reflecting on, I guess, the fact that you've probably all had quite a long day and that this is quite a heavy topic. And what I'll do is I'll just touch very briefly, I think, on 2 broad themes, and then very briefly also on some practical things that we can do. I'm fascinated to know what Madalina is going to say, so I won't be very long, and I'm also keen to hear your questions. But what I do want to share and be very clear about is that while this is a difficult topic and a topic that I think we all struggle to engage with sometimes, it is not inevitable that exploitation and abuse occurs in sport or in society, right? There are absolutely solutions to this, but it is critical that we all play our part and take responsibility for it. So having said that, I think there are two main themes that I just want to touch on today. The first is the specificities within sport that create real and genuine risks to players. And athletes. Khayran, my experience relates mainly to athletes. So I know that there has been abuse of referees, and I'm very mindful of the fact that women in sport and in society as a whole face much higher risks of exploitation and abuse. I'm going to focus on my experience, which is in relation to athletes and players. And I want to unpack a little bit about why sport is so vulnerable to abuse. And I think there are particularities in the industry that I want to highlight. The first is, let's unpack exploitation. Ultimately, what we're talking about is an abuse of an imbalance of power, right? And that abuse is able to thrive where there is a lack of accountability and a lack of transparency, namely a lack of oversight. Take those two pieces one at a time. In sport, and my experience, which is working with performance and elite and professional athletes, there are very distinct power structures. We're looking at an up or out system, right? If you are passionate, this is something that you've worked towards your entire life, there are funnels, there are ways that individuals are winnowed out of a process which is competitive. And that means that in those pinch points, in those bottlenecks, there are gatekeepers. Those are the people who hold the key to people's dreams, to people's futures, and often to the opportunity to get yourself or your family out of poverty. Those are exceptionally powerful individuals who hold huge sway, and where there is a huge potential for an abuse of the imbalance of power, and also a great opportunity, right? In reality, we're looking at circumstances where in particular, individuals such as coaches are given often sole responsibility as a responsible adult in circumstances where young people or players are taken away from their usual support networks on trips and other such times. So there's a big power imbalance, and there's the opportunity for that power imbalance to be exploited. Then in addition to that, there is quite a particular dynamic within the sporting industry more broadly around this concept that is actively promoted by sports governing bodies of the autonomy of sport, right? This very strong desire to self-regulate as an industry, despite the fact that the industry broadly, and particular sports more than others, has failed to self-regulate. So we are all familiar with the public stories of corruption and of nepotism, but also we have now seen time after time stories, and Khalida's account of the abuse in Afghanistan is one of them, and she told it very beautifully and very distressingly, this long-standing abuse where the internal systems within sport failed to pick it up, right? So we have an industry that wants to self-regulate but doesn't in fact actively police itself. So we have high risk of abuse occurring with low detection rates. And that means that really our focus has to be on strengthening and changing the regulatory structures behind sport. The second point I want to make on that is delving into that piece in a little bit more detail. How do we improve the regulatory structures to ensure that abuse is less likely to occur? I know that the previous panel of this conference talked a lot about prevention through safeguarding. I want to talk a little bit more about how we tackle it when potential concerns are raised. So the second theme that I've seen in every sport, in every country that I've worked in, is that there really is a need for improving reporting and investigation processes, in particular, better support for victims, survivors, and whistleblowers. Again, Khalida has touched on this, but let me bring together some themes and highlight some of that. We know from the abuse stories that have come to light that in reality, we rely almost entirely on victims, survivors, and whistleblowers to alert us. However, none of the systems that I've encountered across the different sports in which I work have acknowledged the huge risk faced by victims, survivors, and whistleblowers when they seek to report. Again, Khalida touched on it, but first and foremost, when you think of it, and this was covered quite a lot in the recent gymnastics and athletics accounts here in the UK, but we also heard of it when in the US gymnasts accounts in the US, right? In reality, when you report and you make accusations within an industry that is so insular, you risk your career as a minimum. But in reality, we're looking at people who are risking their dreams and their future, but also their safety, their family safety, their prospects to be able to sustain their family. And the case in Afghanistan is one, but it is not the only case where we have seen extraordinary risks, real life-threatening risks to people who are blowing the whistle on serious, long-standing abuse that has been going on for 20 years, where either it was known that it was going on and regulatory entities and governing bodies did nothing to resolve it, or it was not known. So we ask those who have already experienced such terrible suffering to take on the major burden and pay the highest price when they're trying to hold their abusers to account. And that's just not an ethical or sustainable system, right? So very often we are told we have a reporting hotline, but that reporting hotline is only accessible online. That means you need to have an internet connection. It's only accessible in 3 or 4 languages. That means you have to speak one of those languages. It means that you have to be literate, which is often not the case because many people who are abused and who are targeted by perpetrators are disenfranchised. You also need to be capable emotionally of reliving some of the most horrific experiences of your life and then chronicling them in a way where the evidence is sufficient to meet that initial burden or standard, or that initial standard of proof, right? If you think about it and you break it down and you look at it from the perspective, for example, of a young woman who's been repeatedly raped from a young age and groomed by the perpetrator to believe that the abuse that she experienced is normal, it's an insane system that is incapable of adequately receiving reports. And what all of the victims and survivors that I've worked with, and this includes men and women, recent and non-recent cases, they don't feel believed, they don't feel supported, they don't feel protected, they don't feel respected, and they don't feel that they are being kept informed. And I think all of those things were perfectly highlighted as well in Khalida's explanation of the Afghan cases. And the cause of this is that lots of sports governing bodies and clubs and broadly institutions that are responsible for protecting people and therefore also having systems in place that allow reports to be received, they lack the legal expertise and the therapeutic clinical background knowledge that creates a pathway that allows victims and survivors to report. But there's also just a lack of acknowledgement or recognition of the impacts of abuse on victim and survivors' ability to tell their stories. So briefly then, if I may, Khayran, what can we do concretely as individuals on these calls with our different backgrounds to change some of that? Well, I think it depends a little bit on your sphere of influence, but all of us have a sphere of influence, right? Whether we are lawyers working with survivors and victims, whether we are athletes or advocates, whether we are working in sports governing bodies and clubs, we all have a sphere of influence. And I think often starting the conversation is the hardest part of it, right? There is still extensive stigma around abuse, particularly sexual abuse. It is exceptionally different. None of us like it. None of us want it to happen. So it's exceptionally difficult to start that conversation. It takes courage, but it is critically important that we start opening up the dialogue. And whether that's with young people or whether that's with our colleagues, we need to be able to have transparent conversations and honest conversations about the risks that exist and what we can do to mitigate that. So if there's one thing that you do after this, figure out a couple of people in your organization, in your network, who you feel you can have a trusted conversation with, and think about what you can do better in terms of looking at the systems from a survivor and victim-centered approach. a little bit more particularly for those who work within sports governing bodies, clubs, etc. Look for those pinch points of power, right? Remember, it's about an exploitation or an abuse of an imbalance of power. So look for, if you're working with within a sports governing body, look for big influxes of cash, right? That was the case in the Afghan situation, where FIFA invested a ton of money purportedly to improve the women's game. And in fact, that was being funneled out through a system where there was a lack of fiscal probity, and it was being used to exploit women. The allegations in relation to the Haitian situation that Khayran mentioned are exactly the same, right? That finances that were being provided to the Haitian Football Federation allegedly have been misused and appropriated in order to have access to young and vulnerable women under the banner of giving them football and housing and opportunities. So look for pinch points of power, particularly in circumstances where there is a lack of fiscal probity, where there's a lack of good governance. Khayran mentioned the fact that Yves Jean Bart, the suspended president of the Haitian Football Federation, was recently re-elected. I can't remember if it's the 5th or 6th term, but certainly he'd been in power well over 20 years. And a lack of diversity. I know this is a topic that will be covered elsewhere in this conference, but where we have a lack of diversity, we have poorer quality decision-making, but also less people with lived experience or potential lived experience who understand the risks better and who understand the impact when it goes wrong. And then finally, whether you're working as an individual, as a lawyer, or whether you are working within a sports governing body, look at how to create survivor and victim-centered reporting and investigation processes. And I think this is incredibly difficult. I still get this wrong. This is a constant learning process. Every day I look back and I learn something new and I think, gosh, I wish I'd known that before, and isn't it awful that I got it wrong? But we have to be brave and we have to try and be better at every stage. That is what we owe ourselves. That's what we owe the sport that we love, and that's what we owe survivors and victims. And that means recognizing the basic needs of individuals. Again, Khalida mentioned it. In reality, when we are talking to people whose lives are at risk, do you really think that they can sensibly and properly engage in a complex, protracted legal process? No. Make sure that their basic needs in terms of safety, etc., are covered. Think carefully about the risk of re-traumatization in the course of evidence gathering. There is lots of information out there. I'm happy to have a look in a minute and pop some links in there as well. But if you do not know what that means, and you are engaging directly with survivors and victims, then you are at risk of creating more harm and doing more damage than was originally in place. So ensure that you understand what the impact is of abuse. Not every single survivor and victim is traumatized, but recognize that often it's about a lack of control, right? So for those of us who are lawyers engaging with survivors and victims, we have to be really cautious in how we help them process information. The best version that I've done of this was working very, very closely with a clinician who helped my client on an extensive exploration of her healing journey until she got to the point where she owned her story, which she denied for years. She owned her story and she felt ready and empowered to tell that story, right? That was a critically different experience than many, many, many of the victims and survivors I've spoken to who were interviewed by sports governing bodies. There are really small things that we can do, right? I did a course last week on solution focus-based therapy, which is just about how you introduce and how you engage with individuals, recognizing the courageous role that they've played, rather than just treating them as a kind of this single narrative of someone is a victim of abuse. I recommend Dr. Jessica Taylor's, the final point I'll make. I was listening to her this morning, actually. She's a fascinating kind of source of lots and lots of information. And she was talking about a pro-belief approach and a merits-based approach. A pro-belief approach doesn't mean that you unquestioningly accept everything that an individual tells you. But it does mean that you start off and you make it clear that you are open to hearing this narrative and that you believe people. It doesn't mean that you suspend the burden or the standard of proof. It does not mean that you interfere with due process. It does not mean that you infringe the rights of the alleged perpetrator in terms of their right to to representation and due process and the presumption of innocence. None of that is affected by this, right? But your starting point is belief. If you do not have that, survivors and victims will turn away and never come back. And sports governing bodies are absolutely contingent on them reporting. So that means that your entire system collapses. I'll pause there, Khayran, because I feel that I want to hear from Madalina now and from others, but I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Kat. And I think Sean can take a note of this, that we're glad that he's started this conversation at some point, and that we should continue having the same, because you know, we need to have consistency and solution-based approaches towards this. So now to Madalina. As a former gymnast and being a criminal and human rights lawyer yourself, with vast experience over the years, and currently being a member of the UEFA Control Ethics and Disciplinary Body on an organizational level, what are the procedures in place for complaints and sanctions, and are they enough? And what more measures need to be put in place to further safeguard women and girls against abuse, and what they have to say about protection offered towards perpetrators? I know this is already covered vastly and very well by Kat and Khalid at some point, but I want Madalina to give her point of view on this. Welcome, Madalina.
Thank you very much, Khayran. And I cannot say how honored I am to be in the same panel as Khalida, who is a real fighter for the rights of victims and survivors, and also with Kat, who's also done so many things to protect those victims and to also get justice for them once they were able to speak out. My personal experience as a sports person is quite insignificant, because I was never good enough to reach that level in gymnastics to actually stick to it and to witness from the inside what might be wrong. But I have had the experience as a defense lawyer for many victims or survivors, including in sports such as gymnastics, but not only. I've had experiences in tennis and cycling, etc. What I can say is that clearly all sports are affected, and this is also sustained by research. So we know that all sports are affected, all levels of performance are affected, all continents, all countries. It's not a question of race, it's not a question of color, it's not a question of financial means, unfortunately. And I would just give you one example which really was striking to me a few weeks or a few months ago. I came up a bit by accident I found this research which has been done, a survey which had been done by some bar associations here in Switzerland. So nothing to do with sports. We're talking about bar associations, lawyers, young lawyers. 401 firms, law firms in Switzerland were contacted and participated in the survey. And the results are simply frightening. They show that more than 2/3 of women, young lawyers or senior lawyers, irrespective of the age, have been abused or harassed in their workplace. So this is a phenomenon that happens, unfortunately, everywhere, not just in sports. Of course, I agree with Kat that there are some specificities of sport, which she has very well underlined, which make it more prone to this kind of, create the opportunities, more opportunities for this kind of behavior from predators. But we see it everywhere. I mean, we see it in the most privileged milieux. We see it in people who are educated and who know their rights better than anyone else. So this really shows you that this phenomenon is so global, and it needs some global solutions. Now, Khalida's presentation, which was extremely emotional and really also touched me, I suppose it touched everyone, pointed out a few things which I think are universal, and we know this is what we should do better. We know we should raise education. We know we should improve a lot reporting mechanisms within national and international sport governing bodies, and not just on the paper. As Kat was saying, many organizations already have something in place. But when you actually work for victims and try to defend those victims and try to get justice for them in front of those disciplinary bodies of sport governing organizations, you find, unfortunately, many times that those regulations, those policies which are in place are just on paper, and that the real the real help which is needed for the victims at that particular stage, at that late stage where we're just trying to get justice for them, that help is absolutely insufficient. So my relevant experience in this panel, and this is the only angle that I dare to bring here, is as a defense attorney for victims and survivors, but in front of disciplinary bodies within national or international sports governing organizations. And I have seen from my own experience that many times these instruments which are already in place are far from being victim friendly, if I may say so. Khalida talked very well about this difficulty of finding the channel, finding the right person. This is something which is tremendously important within sports organizations. And she also touched upon something which I believe is really central, not just in sport, but everywhere, the fact that victims are still blamed for what happened to them, and not only in sports. Again, we see this also in other broader cases. And maybe the most frightening thing, to me at least, among all the things that she said, was the fact that she has reached out for 1 year and a half, and nobody answered. You're out there, you're actually grabbing your courage with both hands, trying to reach out, trying to find help, putting yourself into danger many times by doing that. And when you finally do that, you launch the call and nobody answers. That is simply frightening and should never happen. And the fact that you're not taken seriously, because that's what probably explains the fact that nobody answers, this fact is as frightening as the first. Now, this is obviously a huge topic, and I do not dare pretend that I have all the answers for all of this, but what I would like to bring as possible solutions from my personal experience working with victims and survivors is, at this late stage where you're supposed to get justice for the victims in front of disciplinary bodies or other types of bodies in arbitration within the national or international sports governing bodies. I said these procedures are far from being friendly, and there are two things that I would like to really point out today from a broad array of things which I find to be extremely unfriendly for the victims and very little helping for the victims. Two things which are for me very important. The first one is the fact that at the level of most national and international sports governing bodies, there is no legal aid in place, no financial assistance, no pro bono services to actually get help, get legal help for those victims to put their case forward. This is something which, if it was a national procedure in front of a national court or body, definitely in many cases, the victims would be able to obtain, if they fulfill the conditions, they would be able to obtain legal aid. I don't understand, even today, why it is not possible for most of the international federations, or all of them, to generalize the system of legal aid. To my knowledge, today, only 3 or 4 international federations do have such a system. UEFA has one, FIFA has one, the International Ice Hockey Federation has one, where actually victims, once they reach this level, once they reach this stage, they are proposed legal aid and they are proposed competent pro bono legal services. This is tremendously important because, as Kat had said, we're dealing with people who come from every background, from every country, from every culture, and those people will not know how to defend themselves. And sometimes, even quite often, the policies and the regulations, disciplinary regulations of international sporting bodies are quite complicated. It's not very easy to actually be able to put your case forward. There are conditions, even formal conditions, that you have to meet. You need a lawyer to protect you, or that is simply almost impossible to obtain for many, many victims or for many survivors of harassment and abuse, because they don't have the means to hire lawyers to protect them. As Mr. Mathieu Reb, who, as you know, is the Secretary General of the CAS, had said once when he was talking about Claudia Pechstein and her very famous legal marathon, he said she was lucky because not every athlete has the means, the financial means, to do such a marathon. And he's absolutely right. But knowing that, national and international federations, in my perspective, should really take steps, very concrete steps, to be able to ensure legal aid and pro bono services also for victims of abuse and harassment in sport. It's not even something which would cost them, because for pro bono services, this is easy to organize and it's not costly. The second thing that I would propose also as a very concrete, a very, let's say, down-to-earth means to improve the situation of victims and survivors within the legal proceedings at this late stage of proceedings in front of national or international sports governing bodies. And this is also coming from my experience, is that shockingly to me, still today, many national or international federations do not recognize any legal standing in the disciplinary proceedings for the victims. It's simply shocking for someone who has been around the legal system. Many international federations, most of them are, as you know, are here in Switzerland, based here, headquartered here, do not consider that the victim is a party to the proceedings. And therefore, since they interpret very narrowly the concept of party, the victim, once he or she has filed all the necessary documents, once he or she has found the courage, the means to come to this international federations, has found the channel, the right person. So after all this trouble, after all this effort, you finally file maybe a very complicated complaint with the annexes, with the appendixes to it. And then what do you find? You have no legal standing in the case. It's the case for many international federations. I will not name them here because they know who they are, but it's something which is extremely shocking to me. The fact that after all this trouble and having an interest which is clearly worthy of protection and being directly affected by the proceedings, that person, the victim, the survivor, does not have any legal standing in the proceedings. They are only useful for the organization to report, and then everything else happens behind closed doors. It's just shocking. I recently had a case in a sport that I will not mention, where exactly this has happened. We have relentlessly with the victim to be able to finally report what had happened. It's not the first victim that complains about this particular person, manager, coach. And we have filed, if I'm not mistaken, 600 pages complaint and appendixes. It took a lot of time, it took some money, it took a lot of effort from the victim. And today, we only know through the press, through a press statement, that particular coach or manager will be sanctioned. But that's all we know. We have absolutely no idea what has happened in this file. We have absolutely no idea among all the things that we raised, which ones were believed, which ones were proven. The victim has absolutely zero knowledge. So I will stop here, Khayran. I think I went over my time.
I actually wanted to ask a question based on the discussion you're just having. How with this standing point, how can this be fixed, or how should it be fixed?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
How should this be fixed in terms of the, with the standing?
Well, it's quite easy. It just takes a stroke of a pen. From my perspective, the organizations, the sports governing bodies, which even today do not recognize any legal standing to victims, should simply, I mean, I say simply, it's not very simple, but it's not very complicated either, should modify their regulations in order to allow victims legal standing in the proceedings. My personal opinion, being a Swiss qualified lawyer, is that this is actually in line with Swiss law, because both Swiss civil and Swiss administrative law allow for the victim in any type of administrative or civil proceedings to be involved in the proceedings, to have legal standing if the victim is particularly touched by what happened and if she or he has an interest worthy of protection. Clearly, this can be argued in cases of harassment and abuse. So in my opinion, and with this I will finish, what is happening today in most of the international federations based in Switzerland, especially, is that their regulations and their policies, which exclude totally victims from the legal proceedings as a party or as a participant, which is also different, those legal proceedings are simply, to me, contrary to Swiss law. So this is something which definitely should be changed. So if I summarize my recommendations based on my cases lately, two things: legal aid, it doesn't cost much. It doesn't cost even anything if it's pro bono services, and generalizing legal standing for victims in proceedings in front of disciplinary bodies, in international governing bodies. And this, again, is just the tip of the iceberg. It's just a small part that can be done and should be done, but it should not be forgotten that many other things are necessary, such as education, raising awareness, improving to the reporting mechanisms, and really taking this seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Madalina, for that contribution. Okay, before I hand over to Sean to highlight some of the, I know there are many questions coming in through from the audience. Kat, Madalina, Khalida, anyone can answer this question. I know equality cannot be achieved if women are not safe. So does this go to the root of governance of sports governing bodies and sport entities due to the lack of diversity and inclusion, or enough women representation on board level or managerial level? I know one of the audience has pointed out that this is not unique to men abusing women and girls, but also the other way around. But I want to capture that lack of or enough women representation on, in sports governing bodies. Would this be part of the solution to the problem? Kat, Madalina or Khalida, anyone of you can take this.
I'll start. Yeah, I'll start very briefly. The answer is yes. It's not a full solution, but it's definitely a very significant part of the solution. Look, sports governing bodies and the leadership in sports governing bodies is horrifically undiverse as it is across kind of all intersectional issues, but particularly if you look at underrepresentation of Black people, Black women in particular, and so many of the athletes that make the sports possible and the sort of talent at the heart of it, and also so often those people who are most disenfranchised. I saw the comments. I think it's correct. I don't think anybody said that women don't commit abuse. Statistically, it's tiny. The fraction is tiny. So of all of the cases that I've dealt with, there is one incident of abuse by a woman compared to hundreds by men. But I don't really think it's terribly helpful to polarize that on a gender front. I think it's correct to acknowledge it. So yes, just having women in power isn't a total solution, but ultimately it is about abuse of power, right? It's not, and gender is one dynamic that creates a power imbalance because of the way that society is structured. There are many others, and there are lots of other ways you can put people regardless of their gender in a position of power. And if you then don't have the processes and the transparency and the accountability and the oversight to ensure that that power is not abused, then yeah, absolutely, regardless of the gender of individuals, abuse of power can occur. So yes, we need more diversity for many, many, many reasons, this being just one of them, but it's not the full solution.
Thank you, Kat. My next question would be on the autonomy of sports. I know, Kat, you already highlighted on this. For those who don't know what autonomy of sports is, which is the self-regulation of sports governing bodies with limited intervention from public bodies, and government seeking to safeguard the integrity of sports. Given the nature of the crimes, should autonomy of sports be challenged, and as its integrity, especially when it comes to these cases, is almost non-existent?
If I may add one thing, Khayran, which also is in the direction that Kat pointed out, I totally agree that increasing diversity helps. It's not the only answer, obviously, but it could help. In my opinion, the other factor, which is really extremely important, and it also stems from what Khalida was saying, you need within national and especially within international sports governing bodies to have more people who have field experience, who know cultures, irrespective of their place of origin, irrespective of the color of their skin. It's not a question of representing in a very rigid manner this or that particular race or category of people. It's not that. I think, in my humble opinion, having worked for a few years on the field, especially in sports organizations, I think it's really, really this, which is the most important thing, field experience. The fact that the person who is there to answer the calls that Khalida and her team were calling out, that person has to have a good understanding of those particular cultures, of those particular efforts which are needed.
Madalina, sorry to come in on this, but I just thought because of time, and Khayran, you've done a fantastic job. So just forgive me, I'm incredibly impatient, as people know, and so forgive me for this. But you raised some really great points in this discussion. And first of all, before I asked a question building this point, thank you so much, Khalida, for everything that you've done, and Kat as well, and Madalina. Khayran was the catalyst for this panel coming together, and it was, I know that many people watching, I've had some private messages. It's a very emotional topic, and incredibly brave individual for what you've done, and it's awful that you went through that. And I think but some issues came up on diversity and inclusion panel yesterday in terms of activism, but also in terms of governance. And I think that what you've done has absolutely encouraged this to become more of an issue that we are talking about, and it's something that people are starting to move on and take action on. So thank you sincerely for doing that. I know it's difficult for you to talk about this issue as it is for everyone else. The issues that you talked about, and you raised so many good points throughout this discussion, is about reporting, investigations. And in the last panel, there was talks, Giamatino has been talking about an investigatory body, an independent investigatory body. And Khalida, you started off with who to turn to, right? The big problem of who do you turn to? Then if we go down this chain, my question for you guys would be, as a panel, should there be this it came up in the earlier discussion as well, should there be a global independent body to deal with these matters? And also then the second question in terms of Madalina, and this was the reason why I came in, and forgive me for interrupting you, but was the point on lack of diversity and or in terms of lack of specialist knowledge. Well, should there be a special court to deal with this? Because in the earlier panel, they came up with the difficulty with criminal cases, the difficulty, as Khalida has said, this goes on for a long time. These cases get very drawn out, right? And sometimes there is no real win in that scenario. It's just a very difficult process. But given the sensitivities of this, should there be a separate body that's got specialist expertise, that has the ability to have compassion and understanding of the sensitivities around it, rather than just in all due respect to our colleagues who are gas arbitrators and so forth, but have got no expertise with dealing with some of these issues, having to have these cases brought before them? What do you think?
If I may answer quickly the second question, and I will leave the first question to my excellent colleagues. My personal opinion might be divergent from the majority here. I personally believe that it is not necessary to have a special tribunal or a specialized type of court for this kind of issues, because for many reasons, but just two are very important to me. I used to be a magistrate also in my native country for a number of years, quite a number of years, and I can tell you that the judge's position, or the arbitrator's position for that matter, has to be the same regardless of the matter which is at hand. I think what is extremely important in bodies such as the CAS, who is a very numerous body, so over 400 arbitrators now, is that they should also include people who have knowledge on that particular topic, as they have very good people who have knowledge all about football contracts, who have knowledge about transfer contracts.
Are you suggesting a sort of there's an anti-doping division in CAS? One of the arguments for having the anti-doping division was there was a specialist list of people who had specialist knowledge. You're saying have the bodies, but within that body have the expertise within the various bodies.
Yes, but I believe, and it's only my personal opinion, that particular division, which is new, as you know, in the CAS, is also justified by the fact that doping is a very technical matter. It's a very specific, very specific topic where don't only have to have a very good legal knowledge and arbitration knowledge, but also many times you have to have very good technical and medical knowledge. I'm not saying that in the matter of abuse and harassment, specific knowledge is not necessary. Of course it is, but it's much easier to have even generalists, let's say panelists, who have a good sensitivity or good knowledge about this particular matter, being in panels or arbitrating or judging this. Because otherwise, just to finish on that, otherwise this may also be argued for just about anything, any type of offense. I have heard many people saying that we need a specific court for manipulation of competitions, and this can go on forever.
So thank you very much. Kat, you're a human rights lawyer. Yesterday on the athlete activism panel, Rob Quiller from Global Athlete and Gigi Alford from World Players Association was saying, if you need a human rights specialist, go to a human rights specialist. Don't, not saying they're not sports lawyers who are human rights specialists, but go to a human rights specialist. What's your take on that, as in terms of what is the, as I think you mentioned that there's going to be a sort of a report that's going to be conducted, or investigations going to be conducted. What's your sort of take in terms of how do you actually get effective recourse and remedy, for these types of abuses in the current system? Because I don't know, it seems from some of the stuff you said, it seems very problematic at the moment.
Yeah, I think it is very problematic. I don't disagree with Madalina, actually. I think we can get a bit fixated with kind of new entities, and the critical thing is that there is an entity that has the right level of expertise, and you don't have to create new entities to build in that expertise. I do agree that you need to have a degree of experience, and I think it's really important with these cases that you have experience, not just from the perspective of representing or defending a sports governing body, but that you've walked alongside a survivor or victim in one capacity or another. I just think it's a critically different experience. Madalina made an extremely good point around legal aid, and just, very, very few of the victims and survivors that I've worked with, in fact, none of them were able to pay me. It was either because of the intervention of incredible organizations like FIFPro, the International Footballers Trade Union, who've been representing and supporting footballers. All the work was done pro bono, right? I mean, that is how this happens. So what you need is structural changes that allow for, where you have good regulation. That's your first starting point. Madalina talked about very simple changes that can happen in the regulation. Provision of legal aid is one of them, but there are many, many others. Taking a victim-centered or a survivor-centered approach from the outset is something that you can regulate, you can facilitate, you can make sure that there is funding or support available to ensure that the processes are fair. Then you need representation, then you need quality adjudication in one form or another. I think there are other difficulties with CAS, for example, the mandatory arbitration clauses that require...
Yeah, sorry, forgive me. I wasn't suggesting that. So I probably should have said not necessarily a special court, but basically specialist knowledge within some sort of process to deal with it.
Then we all agreed, I think.
And sorry, forgive me, that was a terrible question, terribly structured question. And then in terms of legal aid, I'm interested in this because this is something we can mobilize on and help with. Because we've got thousands of lawyers worldwide who want to assist and help in various different ways. Should there be, like with player development funds, often international federations, national governing bodies will create a ring fence around player development funds. Should there be one? As in many other businesses, they would put a fund in place, as what's happened now in football domestically, to deal with these type of issues. Should there be mandated from the IOC, from FIFA, from other international federations, that they recognize this is, I think, Kat, you've probably articulated, probably one of the best I've ever heard in terms of why it's such high risk, right, and problematic, that given that that is acknowledged, then there should be a certain criteria to ring fence certain amount of funds available to prevent something where Khalida is left for a year and her teammates are left for a year trying to have any confidence in where to go and who to support, and then worrying about how you're going to live and all the other issues that go along with that.
Again, yes, I think that sorry, Madalina, you go ahead. No, okay. No, yes, and I would say you then need to provide specialist training. So there has been an appetite from pro bono lawyers. I think there's lots that can be done. I think it really depends on the individual experience. I do think that there is a real gap between commercial sports law and representing victims and survivors in allegations of exploitation, harassment, and abuse. That doesn't mean that there are not fantastic transferable skills. It doesn't mean that I do not strongly welcome interest from sports lawyers. I think there needs to be specialist training. At the moment, I'm working with a team of clinicians and pro bono lawyers to help law societies understand sometimes the tension that exists between acting in a client's legal best interest and acting in their therapeutic best interest, right? There is a genuine tension there. It is very complicated. It should not be left up to lawyers at any level of experience and expertise to try and manage that. So we're working on a package on how you can engage in a trauma sensitive fashion and to try and get law societies to do that as well. So yes to the fund, but also training, expertise, collaboration, sharing, being transparent and honest about the difficulties that this work brings. And finally, significant input from survivors and victims along the way in what they need.
And the point I was going to make is that so we're called LawInSport. I said this on other sessions, but probably haven't done it before, but as much as we should. But we're called LawInSport for a reason, and there's not actually that many full-time sports lawyers, quote unquote, worldwide. But there's a hell of a lot of child protection, criminal lawyers who work globally who would love to do more sports work, and this would be one way that I think we could mobilise them to be involved and be helpful and contribute. So I think that's a really good point. I'm not sure if Khalida is still there. Hiya. Yeah, thank you again for sharing your experience. I said really like a lot to think about there. What would have given you trust in a body, or what does that look like in terms of where to go? Because I've dealt with issues domestically here where I haven't trusted various organizations where people have told me certain things, because just transparency and not understanding the systems and stuff. But from your perspective in Afghanistan, it sounded like a very lonely experience. So what would have given you, do you think?
I think from our experience working in Afghanistan Football Federation case, what was most challenging factor for us was people were not trusting to come forward, especially if they were hearing that the reporting system will go through the Football Federation or the FIFA. They were still thinking it's within football and it's within the system that kind of will not protect our information. But what we were missing the most, and I think the more people would be there to come, and especially were encouraged to come, if there was an organization or a governing body outside the Football Federation. If there was a kind of a system or an organization where we're not dependent on Football Federation, and even like moving forward, even in FIFA, there are so many people were not trusting to come forward, because they were saying, yes, I know that I have witnessed certain things. I cannot come tell to FIFA because they will report back, because I know these people, they are very connected with the employees back in Afghanistan Football Federation, and I will lose my job and my career and I'm actually the one providing meal for my family, and I'm so much dependent on my job. Yes, I know this is a great cause, but also my family is first. What we need is we need a system or governing body that kind of be outside FIFA, outside these football federations. I'm talking a lot about FIFA because I'm talking about more football. But in everywhere, it should be outside, and also it shouldn't be dependent on the money that come from these organizations, because somehow it will end up and people will not trust, because it's more than that. And just like on note, I will leave this. What hurt me the most, and usually when I go to bed, and I still remember those words, that a young girl told me, I fought with entire society, with the community, with all the barriers, the culture barriers that were stopping me to come and play football. I fought alone, and then I come on the football pitch with big dreams that I will represent my country. And my dreams ended up in a dark room being raped by president of the Football Federation. And from that time, I stopped dreaming. It's all about dreams. And it's all about those lives that matters. And these people know that they have the power. They can actually manipulate the power because people come with big dreams. And the other thing is like, it's also responsibilities of organization and governing bodies to educate the players, provide the education, free education.
Absolutely.
They should know what is actually abuse, what is harassment. At 14 years old or 15 years old that they are selected to the national team, they don't know so much what is actually normal in football. They get abused, they get harassed, but they don't know if it's actually normal. Is it the culture?
That is such a, so I don't know where to start with that, but I think there is something, we were talking about this in a focus group with UNICEF, right? And again, it's a part of it is particularly in football, right? Where the business is around transferring the ownership of an individual, right? Where the focus is on this transfer system, which seems to me to be very, very problematic in terms of culture. One of the things was, how do you en masse, there was discussing how do you en masse explain to people, one, where is a safe place to go, and it still seems that there seems to be some confusion over what that safe place may be and where it is. And secondly, though, that in football, which don't be wrong, sport, as we know, is very powerful, but as you said, creates situations like you just said, which are just the most horrific situations that everyone should have the priority to stop, as in the number one priority, like, should be to stop. That should be the message. That shouldn't, like, it's uncomfortable to talk about, it's uncomfortable, emotional to hear from, and and having no proximity to it, I can imagine why people avoid it, as an avoidance, as a strategy to deal with these things. But it seems like there should be campaigns that should be mandated across the globe from the federations downwards, and maybe FIFA have got some plans for that. I know that Anne Tivas was saying that apparently she's seeing a trend where governments are now starting to be apparently having to report back and do some stuff in that arena. But I think there's something there that, Kat, and I know you were very, and I think you were right, and I know the others were as well, keen for some action points on from coming from today, and I think we've recently had the issue of Naveed Afghafari, who was executed as a player, right, as an athlete, and there was some real issues coming on, some great discussions behind the scenes in terms of what this means and what we can do as a community, as in the profession. And I think if there was ever a call to action at this moment in time, then coming together and actually saying, right, how do we raise this up the agenda, rather than just keep on talking about player transfer, sponsorship agreements, and look, it's all important in the ecosystem, but relatively this listening to your experience is something that we should put higher up the agenda.
If I may add maybe just one little information. It seems to be working for the US, because, as you know, they are a bit a step ahead because of all of those horrific scandals in gymnastics. They have already enacted a federal act concerning this, a sort of a central independent safeguarding body, and it seems to be working quite well. And that body in the US also takes care of everything which is related to legal aid, to helping victims, also not just from the financial side or the legal side, but also, as Kat was saying, trying to provide a larger framework with psychologists, working with doctors, etc., etc. So this, I think we can learn a bit from that model. So from my perspective, such a body, such an international and independent body, Khalida is right, it has to be independent from the sports organizations. That would be very useful. However, a court, I think not. That's my personal opinion. My hope would be that when that body, and if that body is created, maybe in 20, 25 years time, we will shut it down because it will not be needed anymore.
I hope you're right. In terms of funding and support at this moment in time for people listening as well, and so maybe to close off the panel, that two things. One, and we can send around emails afterwards to anyone who needs, if anyone's listening, tuning in, you need extra support or whatever, just get in contact, and we'll try and put you in contact with Kat I'm sure, like Madalina and so forth. But in terms of people in Khalida's situation in going forward at this moment in time, where would you recommend? Because I've been contacted, for example, with, and I will be speaking to you, Kat, privately about this, but someone from somewhere internationally, and they didn't know who to turn to for help. Same situation, you know, I'm not sure it's the same situation, but a related situation. And I've been speaking to various people. Again, this is the problem. And everyone's saying we're not necessarily the accountable body. It has to go to this person and that person. And I'm relatively sophisticated. So where can everyone else go if they want to, you know, assist and help people? What should they do, or what actions should they take? Kat?
Sean, I think your suggestion of trying to coordinate something for anybody who's interested through LawInSport, if I've heard you correctly, would be incredibly welcome. There are a couple of organisations working in this. The Centre for Sport and Human Rights is, I think, leading a lot of the conversation, increasingly so. They're a relatively new organisation, but have done some fantastic work already. But there is just so much to do, that the scale of the problem is huge and the complexity is huge. I think we all have to be really open and willing to collaborate. And I think sometimes that's difficult for us as lawyers. It's a little bit easier for me because I now, although I'm a human rights lawyer, I provide human rights expertise rather than directly represent them. I'm not responsible for bringing in my own clients in the way that I was when I was in private practice. And I know it's a challenge. I remember when I had those fee earning targets and things like that. But my capacity is very limited and I'm only one person. So I think it would be fantastic, Sean, if you could use your brilliant network. It's so encouraging that you have taken on, and it's clear that you're very passionate and Khayran's very passionate. And I think if there are people listening, I'm sure that we can come together and kind of have a bit of a brainstorm around that. I think it's critical that we're efficient with the way that we use our resources because there is so little to go around. But I'd be happy to share in a separate conversation what I think organisations like the player unions, like the Centre for Sport and Human Rights, like pro bono organisations are doing at the moment. And I'd be delighted to hear from others and learn from others so that we can kind of map out and hopefully between us cover those key issues and speak with one voice. I can see some of the comments. Lucy's commented around the need for an independent body. I think we have to speak with one voice and make a clear, articulate, well-reasoned submission to organisations about what such an independent body should do and what it looks like. So happy to have another conversation with anybody who is interested in kind of adding their expertise and joining the broader movement people like Khalida have championed and started.
Absolutely. And there is a lot going. I think you're right. There's so much going on as well, and it's really hard because, as you said, it's so complex and so difficult, and so, you know, so much involvement. I think it's a really great point that you make in terms of making sure everyone's applying pressure in the right, or not in the right way, but in a direction that will make meaningful change. I was going to go to Madalina next, and then Khayran, I'm going to come to you. So heads up. Madalina, do you want?
Well, I don't have much to add because, as I said, my personal experience with athletes who have suffered from harassment or abuse in sport is mostly in front of national or international sport bodies, governing bodies. So my recommendations would be more technical, of a technical nature, how we should improve this in the regulations to do that, how we should provide this kind of instrument instead of another one. I also understand, because I have also worked for international organizations in active in sport, that it is not easy for them. Some of them do not have the capacities, some of them do not have the funding. I know it's a COVID situation for everyone. It's clearly, it's sometimes not because they don't want to, it's because they can't. I know it's also difficult for them, but as I say, sometimes where there's a will, there's a way. So I think that Kat is perfectly right, and I'm very happy if we tonight could contribute at least a little bit to raising a bit of awareness about the necessity to do something with an articulated voice, as Kat has said. And I will just leave it there. I was very, very honored to be on this panel today, and thank you very much, Sean, for the invitation.
Thank you. I'm going to let Khalida have the last word. So Khayran, you were the catalyst. You're too humble and polite to say it, so I'll say it. So Khayran was the person who started this from a private conversation, speaking to one of our colleagues about particularly we're looking at it from an African perspective at the time, though, in terms of the risk and stuff. So what would you like to say when we're finishing this call, or is there a call to action, or what you'd like to see come?
Okay, just to conclude, and like from the amazing contributions from Kat, Madalina, and Khalida and yourself, major scandals do, I mean, they can be catalysts for change, but we shouldn't wait till the scandals, when they come out, we're already talking about major numbers. In the case of Afghanistan, we're talking about over 160 girls already abused by the time the case came to light. So how do we change, or how do we get these cases from the early onset, have the solution-based programs and all these things like Kat, and Madalina has already talked about the pro bono and the legal aid services that should be available. And I think also more research needs to be done in this area to understand the risk factors and aspects of organizational culture can either facilitate or protect against abuse. Science always lags behind policy, and that needs to change. All in all, I think implementation plans need to be developed as well. And this includes the procedure of filing complaints. It's already been covered by the panelists, and we can always do more, and it's everyone's responsibility to ensure that abuse does not happen, and when it does, action must be taken.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great points. Khalida.
I just first want to thank you, really, for this opportunity, and I'm so happy that we have amazing people like Madalina and Kat and yourself and Khayran, who is well aware and who are doing everything possible. At least working with Kat, I know that it was like during Christmas, every like during evenings, I was calling her asking for help, and she was there. And there was she was not asking for a specific time. She was like, I'm there for you. This is what we should all do. We should take responsibility because someone there need our help, and it's important. And we should do all of our job from our side, and also hold people accountable who are the governing bodies, and our voice is our power, and my voice has been my power, and I use that to raise awareness and be the voice for voiceless women in my country and in any other country.
And by the way, what can we do to support your organization? So that's everything for people listening. Obviously, you do fantastic work in supporting your fellow football players in Afghanistan with your Girl Power organization. So what can people do to support, if they wanted to support the great work that you're doing? Is there anything we can do to be supportive?
I would say raise awareness, stand for a cause, because Girl Power organization is empowering women of minorities living in Europe and European countries, and specifically immigrants and refugees. So raising awareness, standing for the good cause, that is how we actually stand for each other. That's most important.
And they're a not-for-profit, so you can make donations, Khalida.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was trying to get at. Like, as if people can support the organization.
Yeah. Khalida is not just a brilliant advocate, but a fantastic charity administrator as well. So every penny, I can say, is very well spent, and does an amazing job to show women also how positive and empowering sport can be. So I can definitely encourage everybody, if there's something that you want to do, please support Khalida and her organization.
Absolutely. Thank you I'll do the wrap up now. I just want to say, before I thank I'm going to close off thanking the speakers, but thank you to the people who are tuned in for this. Obviously, you care deeply about this issue too. You care about sport, and I think there is a movement afoot with the work that people like Kat, Madalina, Khayran, obviously Khalida, being so brave to take this forward. There is a movement afoot that is changing the shape of things and is holding people more so to account. But if we can do all we can to avoid these situations, and I know that all of you people are catalysts and have the power to influence change in your respective organizations. So please take that forward. You've got an ally in LawInSport, in us, like I said, in whatever we can do to help, if we can help, we'll try our best to. And if we can't do it directly, we'll help put you in contact with the likes of FIFA Pro, World Players, all these other organizations, Centre for Human Sports and Human Rights, whatever we can do to assist. I think there's some wanted action points. I think there are some action points here. If this is something that touched you, moved you, you're in the space, you would like to do more, please do get in contact. We've got something that we're trying to work on, and I'll talk to you about this in relation to following the Naveed Afghafari case in the background, that we'd love, if you're a lawyer working in the space in particular, to get involved. Other than that, thank you so much to the speakers. Thank you for giving up your time. I know you're extremely busy. Sorry for my lack of coordination with the prep calls and so forth. You've been so gracious, and graceful in your presentations today. But no, seriously, thank you so much for bearing with us with that, and for all your, the kindness you've shown in explaining the sensitivities around this issue. I've learned so much already from today's call. I learned a lot from the earlier panel session, but there's so many points to take away. Thank you. You're absolute legends and inspirations. I mean, really, like it's a, I feel like sometimes in our sector, we get caught up in all the stuff that is important, but not that important, right? And when Khalida's talking about, risk to life, it really brings it home how privileged we are if you live in the UK or in the various parts of the world where you're safe and you're free and you can do whatever you want, without the risk of your life. That I think it's important that we recognise that if we are truly a global sports community and we really buy into the mentality of that sport is something for good, for the force for good, then we should stand by that a little bit more. And it's something that you've certainly pricked my conscience yet again, in terms of what we're focusing on, and maybe we can do better, and I'm sure we can. So thank you all very much. It's a real honor and a privilege. And I hope, hope everyone has a lovely weekend wherever you are, respectively in the world. Thank you. And thank you, Khayran, again. Bye.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.